So let's get started on today's lecture. Today we'll talk about biodiversity and how biodiversity is defined, why biodiversity is important and how we can measure it. And I'll show you a little bit of information about biodiversity worldwide and in Australia. But let's start with the first topic, the definition of biodiversity. So what I did is I went to a very famous report called the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which was one of the major research efforts to document the status of the world's ecosystems. Go and find it if you want a bit of information. And they define biodiversity as the variability among living organisms from all sources, including terrestrial, marine and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within species, between species and of ecosystems. So what does this mean, this definition? Well, first of all, biodiversity is about variability. So differences, variation amongst living organisms. So we're just looking at animals and plants that are alive and the differences between them, or how the variety of them. Living organisms from all sources. So all living organisms from different types of ecosystems and the complexity of which they're part. Ecosystems are very complex and biodiversity definition acknowledges this ecological complexity. And it looks at the diversity, not only the number of different species, but also diversity within a species and diversity of ecosystems. It's quite encompassing, that definition. So why do we care about biodiversity? Well, biodiversity provides important ecosystem services. And that Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that I named before is the report that, one of the first reports that defines different types of ecosystem services that biodiversity can provide. And we distinguish between 4 different ecosystem services: provisioning, regulating, cultural and supporting services. The supporting services support those first 3. And I'll explain each of these in the next couple of slides. Let's start with number 1, provisioning services. They're usually the easiest to understand. They're direct goods that we humans can use, like food, fiber, fuel, fresh water, medication, chemicals, and genetic resources. And we need biodiversity to provide us with different types of provisioning services, different types of food. Without biodiversity, we may not have that much choice in food and fiber. Without biodiversity, we may not have the provisioning of fresh drinking water. Biodiversity is vital to human life on Earth. Another one are regulating services. They regulate different processes on Earth, like pollination, climate, protection from natural hazards, erosion, pest, disease, water purification, lots of different regulating services that biodiversity provides. For example, pest regulation. With a healthy biodiversity, we are better protected from invasive species, for example, like or diseases. But biodiversity also protects us from natural hazards. A dune system provides protection from winds and waves. And without such biodiversity, we're not as well protected. The third type of service, so we have the provisioning services and the regulating services. A third type is cultural services. These are often not as easy to grasp for people. They are things like spiritual values that biodiversity provides, a sense of place, education and inspiration, but also recreation and aesthetic values. So biodiversity provides spiritual values to our indigenous people, for example. They have a strong connection to the land that they live on. And without biodiversity, they lose those spiritual values. For us, biodiversity often provides recreational opportunities. I love bushwalking, for example, and without biodiversity, there's just not that much to do. And bushwalking wouldn't be as interesting. Let me go to the last one. Number 4 are those supporting services that support the provisioning, the regulating, and the cultural services. There are things like primary production, habitat provision, nutrient cycling, water cycling, soil formation, and producing atmospheric oxygen. So let's look at soil formation. Without biodiversity and without proper land cover, we could lose water and nutrient cycling systems in the soil. And that in Australia has led to erosion and salination of the soil. Biodiversity also produces oxygen, which is, again, vital for human life. Biodiversity is essential for many ecosystem services that support human life on Earth. And we'll go more into that in the next several lectures. But have a break first, and we'll be right back.